This video is based on publicly available reports, insider accounts, official statements, and ongoing developments as of June 2026. All quotes are sourced from verified media coverage. Information is subject to change as the situation continues to develop. This content is intended for informational and entertainment purposes only. The views expressed represent analysis based on reported information and do not constitute insider knowledge or confirmed facts beyond what has been publicly reported. Hay said this offseason was going to be different for the Dallas Cowboys. They said this was the year the front office finally got it right. And then, just like that, the most dangerous wide receiver situation in the entire NFL landed right back in their lap. 25 years old. Over 1,400 yards last season. A Pro Bowl nod. And yet, as of right now, George Pickens has not shown up for a single voluntary workout. A long-term deal is completely off the table. Trade rumors exploded so loudly that the Cowboys had to publicly put them out like a 5-alarm fire. And one of the most beloved legends in franchise history is standing on camera, warning Jerry Jones that he is, quote, playing with fire. So before you tell yourself this is just off-season noise, stop. Because this situation, it has every single ingredient to blow up in the Cowboys' face. And we are going to walk through every piece of it. From the moment George Pickens first became a problem in Pittsburgh, to the explosive night in Las Vegas that sent shockwaves through AT&T Stadium, to what Emmitt Smith just said that should terrify every Cowboys fan watching right now. If you've never subscribed to this channel before, right now is the moment, because the stories we're telling here are the ones the mainstream media buries in paragraph 12. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and let's get into it. Let's go back to where this whole thing truly begins. Because to understand what's happening in Dallas right now in the summer of 2026, you have to understand the complicated, combustible, endlessly fascinating story of George Pickens. Not just the receiver, the man. Because George Pickens is not just a football player. He is a personality, a walking headline, a magnet for both brilliance and chaos, and the Cowboys knew every single bit of that when they traded for him. The question now is whether they're fully prepared to live with the consequences. Pickens came out of the University of Georgia as one of the most physically gifted receivers in a generation. The hands, the body control, the ability to go get a football in traffic that most receivers wouldn't even dare attempt, it was all there from day one. Pittsburgh drafted him in the second round of the 2022 NFL Draft, and almost immediately it became clear that the Steelers had selected someone who was not built for quiet, unassuming NFL life. This was a player who wore his emotions like a neon sign. He celebrated with his entire body. He sulked with his entire body. He expressed frustration with his entire body. And in Pittsburgh, where the blue-collar ethos and the team-first culture run as deep as the three rivers that cut through the city, that kind of personality was always going to create friction. The incidents started piling up early. There were sideline outbursts during losses where cameras caught Pickens completely disengaged from his teammates, literally sitting alone on the bench while other players gave him space. There was a moment, captured by insiders who covered the Steelers closely, where Pickens sat down next to a teammate on the bench during a game, and that teammate immediately stood up, moved 2 seats away and sat down next to the punter. Then another player did the same thing. Reporters in Pittsburgh compared the situation to the fractured dynamic that had once existed between Ben Roethlisberger and Antonio Brown. 2 stars who couldn't stand to be in the same building, who would smile for press conferences and then ignore each other on the sidelines. And if you know your NFL history, you know exactly how that story ended. Mike Tomlin, one of the most respected coaches in the entire league, a man who has never had a losing season in nearly 2 decades on the job, began making cryptic statements about Pickens. He talked about growth and development as a player and as a man. He talked about handling certain behavioral concerns between he and I. He refused to name specific incidents publicly, because Tomlin never does, but people who cover that locker room daily knew. Things were getting worse, not better. There was the unsportsmanlike conduct penalty against the Bengals in December 2024. There was the moment Pickens was nearly removed from that very game. There was the sequence against the Cowboys, ironically, in October 2024, when Pickens played just 34 of 58 offensive snaps despite being Pittsburgh's most talented receiver by an enormous margin, and Tomlin tried to explain it away as load management, a phrase that absolutely no one in Pittsburgh believed. Pickens spent chunks of that game sitting motionless and alone. He spiked his helmet so hard it bounced over the bench. And then, at the end of the game's final play, he grabbed Cowboys cornerback Jordan Lewis by the face mask and swung him to the ground. Lewis, walking back to the locker room, turned and said, loudly enough for cameras to pick up, "Pittsburgh need a receiver. George Pickens weak." That moment, in hindsight, feels almost poetic, because a few months later, Jordan Lewis would be Pickens' teammate, and Pittsburgh would indeed be looking for a new receiver. By the spring of 2025, it was becoming clear that the Steelers had quietly decided to move on. The asking price was surprisingly modest, a 2026 third-round pick and a 2027 fifth-rounder. For a player of Pickens' caliber, that was practically a clearance sale. Multiple teams had concerns. Multiple teams stayed away. The Pittsburgh exit had generated enough noise that front offices around the league were asking hard questions about whether the talent was worth the turbulence. Jerry Jones, however, has never been someone who shies away from a gamble. He saw an elite wide receiver available at a discount price during a window where his offense desperately needed another weapon alongside CeeDee Lamb. So Dallas made the call. The trade went through in May 2025, and George Pickens put on a Cowboys star for the first time. Now here's what no one fully expected. The 2025 season was, by nearly every measurable standard, a massive success. Pickens was locked in. He was hungry. He was playing with something to prove, which, as anyone who has followed his career knows, is when George Pickens is at his absolute most dangerous. He finished the year with 93 receptions, 429 receiving yards, third in the entire NFL, and 9 touchdowns. All 3 were career highs. He made the Pro Bowl for the first time. There were games where he looked like the best receiver in football, full stop. His connection with Dak Prescott grew quickly. And the chemistry between Pickens and CeeDee Lamb, 2 electric personalities sharing the same huddle, was must-watch television every single week. But even in the middle of that brilliant season, the old George Pickens appeared at least once, in a way that made the Cowboys front office pay very close attention. It was November 2025, a Monday night football game in Las Vegas against the Raiders, and when the broadcast cameras panned to the Dallas sideline for the first offensive series of the game, something was visibly wrong. CeeDee Lamb was not out on the field. George Pickens was not out on the field. 2 of the most expensive and important offensive weapons the Cowboys possessed were sitting on the bench in Las Vegas, on national television, while their teammates took the field without them. Head coach Brian Schottenheimer stood in front of microphones after the game and called it a coach's decision. He said, a couple things were missed. He hugged both receivers on the sidelines after a touchdown. He said he loved those guys. But he would not say what happened. The internet exploded. Rumors tore through social media like wildfire. The most dramatic version claimed CeeDee Lamb had been spotted at a Las Vegas casino at 7:30 in the morning before a Monday afternoon kickoff. Rumors spread that Lamb had been seen sick outside the casino. The Cowboys said nothing. Pickens said nothing beyond deflecting toward the game plan. And then, days later, CeeDee Lamb sat at his locker and simply told the truth. He and Pickens had gone to the Red Rock Casino the night before the game for dinner and drinks. They stayed out past the team's 10 o'clock curfew. That was why they were benched. Lamb denied being sick at the casino, emphatically, and with a significant amount of personal pride about his ability to, as he put it, hold his liquor. Both receivers came back in on the second drive, and Pickens put up 144 yards and a touchdown in a dominant 33-16 win. Jerry Jones, after the game, described Pickens' performance as poetic. He said it was like watching a ballet. He had never seen anything like it. And so a situation that could have become a major crisis became instead a punchline and then a footnote. The Cowboys won. Pickens was brilliant, and everyone moved on. But that incident did not disappear entirely from the memory of the people making decisions in the Cowboys front office. Because now, as this 2026 offseason unfolds, it is one piece of a much larger puzzle that has Jerry Jones, Stephen Jones, and Brian Schottenheimer making a choice that the entire football world is second-guessing in real time. Here is where things stand right now, and here is why this story matters so much. After Pickens' breakout 2025 season, the expectation around the NFL was that Dallas would lock him up to a massive long-term deal. He had proven himself. He had produced at an elite level. He was 25 years old. He was arguably one of the 2 or 3 best receivers in football. The market for a player of his caliber was going to demand somewhere north of $30 million per year. Projections had him landing around a 4-year deal worth $122 million, which would average out to over $30 million annually. The Cowboys, however, blinked. Rather than negotiate a long-term extension, Dallas decided to place the franchise tag on Pickens, locking him in for the 2026 season at $27.3 million, fully guaranteed. That number, while enormous in absolute terms, is actually significantly below what Pickens would earn on an open market, and crucially the front office made clear, publicly, through multiple statements from both Jerry and Stephen Jones, that they had no intention of negotiating a long-term deal at all during the 2026 offseason. Pickens would play the year on the tag, and then the Cowboys would reassess the following offseason. The stated reasoning involved the presence of CeeDee Lamb's existing deal, $34 million per year, with $100 million guaranteed, and the financial difficulty of carrying two receivers at the top of the market simultaneously. Stephen Jones also noted carefully that the Cowboys had only had one season with Pickens. They needed more time to evaluate the full picture. What went unspoken in those press conferences, but what every reporter covering the beat understood clearly, was the subtext underneath that public rationale. There are still concerns about George Pickens beyond the football field. Concerns about consistency of behavior. Concerns about how he handles adversity. Concerns about what a player with his volatile history does when handed the kind of massive, long-term, fully guaranteed contract that removes the financial motivation to stay disciplined. As one anonymous NFL contract negotiator put it to a reporter from SportsBoom US, and this is a direct insight from someone who has worked inside these negotiations for years, even if Pickens keeps it together in 2026, there would be some obvious concerns about how he would operate with the kind of guarantees that would come with a top-of-market deal. Jerry Jones, the negotiator, added, does not subscribe to the logic of paying two receivers at the top of the market simultaneously. Full stop. So the Cowboys made their call, and then the fallout began. The timing of Pickens signing his franchise tag, arriving just hours before the start of the 2026 NFL Draft, immediately ignited a new wave of trade rumors. The logic was simple. Once a player signs their tag, they can legally be traded. Teams around the league started making calls. The New England Patriots, desperately searching for offensive weapons for their rebuild, were linked to Pickens almost immediately. There were whispers of other teams making inquiries. Veteran NFL insiders reported that trade discussions were actively circulating through the league, even if no specific teams were formally named. Tony Pauline, a respected NFL insider, reported that Pickens' trade rumors continued to swirl with his long-term future in Dallas genuinely up in the air. The Cowboys' response was swift and forceful. Stephen Jones told reporters that evening, after the first round of the draft concluded with no Pickens trade happening, we have no intention of moving George. Head coach Brian Schottenheimer went on NFL Network and said, quote, you guys know how much we love George. We gave Pittsburgh a third-round pick last year, and what he did on the field was incredible. The relationship is awesome. ESPN insider Adam Schefter weighed in, arguing that while Pickens is as talented as anyone in the league, the combination of requiring a first-round pick return plus a massive long-term contract commitment makes any trade deal extraordinarily difficult to execute. NFL Network's Tom Pelissero appeared on The Rich Eisen Show and said he expected Pickens to be a Cowboy in 2026, though he notably added, can I 100% say he'll be a Cowboy in 2026? No, because things change. Things move. Injuries happen. Needs change. So the Cowboys said publicly they were keeping Pickens. The draft came and went. No trade happened. And yet the concerns did not disappear. They simply shifted into a new form. Because here is the reality on the ground right now in Frisco, Texas, as the summer of 2026 begins. George Pickens has not attended a single voluntary offseason workout, not one. The Cowboys' OTA sessions have been happening without one of their most important offensive players on the field. Brian Schottenheimer, when asked about it, said that he only expects Pickens at the mandatory minicamp scheduled for June 16th through the 18th. He said calmly, this is just part of the business. Stephen Jones, when asked whether the team had any assurances Pickens would participate in the voluntary program, said simply, no assurances, just like there are no assurances on other players. That's why it's the offseason, and it's voluntary. The one silver lining the coaching staff pointed to, was that Dak Prescott had been throwing with Pickens during private workouts, and Prescott himself told reporters that Pickens had looked great in those sessions. But the absence from team activities is being watched. It is being noted, and it is being interpreted by people both inside and outside the building as the first sign that George Pickens is not entirely comfortable with how Dallas has handled his contract situation. Which brings us to the voice that, for many Cowboys fans, carries more weight than almost anyone else in this conversation. Emmitt Smith, Hall of Famer, all-time leading rusher in NFL history, a man who wore that Cowboys star for over a decade, who ran for 18,000 yards in that uniform, and who also, critically, lived through his own brutal contract standoff with Jerry Jones. Smith held out. Smith sat out games. Smith knows from lived personal experience exactly how Jerry Jones negotiates, exactly how the Cowboys front office thinks about player value, and exactly what it feels like to be a star performing at an elite level, while the organization treats you like a financial transaction rather than a franchise. Cornerstone. And Emmitt Smith is worried. Speaking. Recently on NFL Network's The Insiders, Smith had a direct message for Pickens. You just ran into the business side of sports, period. There's nothing else but pure business. Try not to take it personally. I know you will because I would take it personally too. But shuffle that energy to your performance because I think your performance itself is going to speak a lot louder than anything else. On the surface, that sounds like supportive, measured advice. But read between the lines, and Smith is telling Pickens something very specific. He is telling him that the Cowboys are not going to handle this the way a player wants them to handle it, and that Pickens needs to protect himself by performing, because the front office is not going to protect him with a contract. And then Smith went further. When pressed on whether Pickens would be with the Cowboys long-term, Smith said, "You know what? I can see them making that decision." And then he delivered the warning that set the football world on fire. However, the question is, does Pickens feel like the Cowboys did not do him right this year, and have a feeling that they will upgrade him next year? And if he doesn't feel like they will, I think he'll be gone. Yardbarker and multiple major NFL publications framed it plainly. Emmitt Smith says the Cowboys are playing with fire. And when the all-time rushing leader says the franchise he bled for is playing with fire, people listen. The financial math underneath all of this makes the situation even more interesting and complicated. CeeDee Lamb is currently earning $34 million per season, with $100 million guaranteed. Pickens, on the franchise tag, is making $27.3 million in 2026. If Pickens has another season anywhere close to his 2025 production, another 1,400-yard, 9-touchdown campaign, his market value on the open market in 2027 will be astronomical. He will have proven himself over 2 consecutive elite seasons. He will be 26 years old. He will be in the absolute prime of his career. And the Cowboys will either have to pay him close to what they're paying Lamb, which Jerry Jones has publicly indicated he does not want to do, or they will watch him walk out the door in free agency, having rented an elite receiver for a third-round pick and 1/10 contract-clouded season. The alternative is that the Cowboys somehow reach a deal before the July 15th deadline, the date by which teams must sign tagged players to long-term contracts, or have them play out the year on the tag. But all signals from the organization point toward that deadline passing without a deal. The Cowboys have said without any ambiguity that they will not negotiate an extension this offseason. Pickens' agents at Athletes First, led by the powerful and well-respected David Mulugheta, are known in league circles for keeping clients on the field rather than forcing holdouts, which is why the team can be at least somewhat confident Pickens will show up when mandatory minicamp arrives. But keeping a player on the field and keeping a player happy are two entirely different things. The Yahoo Sports report from just hours ago framed the central question bluntly and brilliantly. Is Pickens ready to do everything necessary to remove any concerns and lay a foundation for a big contract in the future? Or are there still questions and concerns that could make a team leery about eventually giving him the kind of contract he already arguably deserves? That sentence captures everything. Because the Cowboys' entire strategy right now is built on a bet. They are betting that Pickens, with another year of elite production, will remove enough of the remaining behavioral concerns to justify the massive long-term investment. They are betting that he stays engaged, stays professional, and channels every ounce of his frustration about the contract situation into his performance on the field. They are betting that the curfew incident in Las Vegas was a one-time slip-up between two receivers who got a little too comfortable in Sin City, and not a symptom of something deeper. And they are betting that Pickens himself believes the payday is coming, that he trusts the process enough to play out 2026 on the tag, torch opposing defenses alongside CeeDee Lamb, and then return to Dallas the following offseason as the most coveted receiver in football, finally getting the deal he deserves. Michael Irvin, another Cowboys legend and Hall of Famer, has publicly called out Stephen Jones for the strategy, pushing back on the idea that it makes sense to make a franchise-caliber receiver feel like a temporary rental when you are trying to build a team culture around winning. The Cowboys, meanwhile, have been spending the rest of their offseason making moves that suggest they genuinely believe this roster is ready to compete. They drafted Ohio State safety Caleb Downs, a player many considered the best safety in the entire draft class. They traded for edge rusher Rashan Gary, a player with legitimate Pro Bowl ability who brings pass rush pressure that Dallas has desperately needed for years. The defensive infrastructure is being rebuilt around a first-year coordinator who is inheriting what was historically one of the worst defenses in football. And Jerry Jones, for all the chaos and drama and noise that surrounds his franchise at all times, knows that this offense, with Dak Prescott, CeeDee Lamb, and George Pickens at the center of it, is capable of scoring enough points to carry the team through another season while the defense catches up. The offense, if it stays healthy and intact, is genuinely terrifying. Pickens and Lamb as a 1-2 combination is arguably the best wide receiver duo in the NFL. Prescott, despite everything the Cowboys' defense put him through in 2025, is still an elite-level quarterback when his weapons are around him. The Cowboys went 33-16 against the Raiders the night those same two receivers were benched for a curfew violation, and Pickens still had 144 yards and a touchdown. That is the level of talent we are talking about. But talent, as every single person who has followed George Pickens' career knows, is only half the story. The other half is the question that has followed him from Georgia to Pittsburgh to Dallas, the question that Mike Tomlin danced around for 3 seasons, that Pittsburgh's front office eventually answered by trading him for a third-round pick, and that the Cowboys have now made their entire 2026 strategy dependent on resolving. Can George Pickens, when he is feeling undervalued, when he is working without the long-term security he believes he has earned, when he is watching the clock tick toward a free agency that could define his career financial future, can he be the version of himself that went out and caught 93 balls for 1,429 yards? Or does the other version show up? The version that slammed helmets on benches in Pittsburgh. The version that grabbed face masks in frustration. The version that made teammates scoot 2 seats away on the bench rather than sit next to him. That is the question over which the entire Dallas Cowboys offseason is currently hanging, and it will not be answered until the season begins, and maybe not even then. The July 15th deadline for a long-term deal will come and pass. Pickens will report to mandatory minicamp, likely based on everything reported, and then both sides will simply wait. The Cowboys will pray their bet pays off. Pickens will play with something burning inside him, the way hungry players always do when they feel disrespected by a contract decision. And the rest of the NFL will watch because this story, this specific dynamic between a franchise that has always been more comfortable with drama than most, and a receiver who generates more drama than almost anyone in the game, is not going anywhere quietly. Emmitt Smith said the Cowboys are playing with fire. He's been right about Jerry Jones before. He's been burned by Jerry Jones before. And when Emmitt Smith, standing in front of a camera, looks directly into the lens and warns the organization he gave his entire career to that they are taking a risk they might not be able to control, you listen. Because fire, as every Cowboy fan has learned over the past decade of missed playoffs and squandered talent, has a way of spreading when you least expect it. George Pickens is one of the best receivers in football. He is 25 years old. He is about to play the most important year of his professional life on a 1-year, fully guaranteed $27 million deal, without a long-term contract on the table, without OTA attendance, and with a franchise that has made clear, publicly, that they have not yet decided if he is worth the full investment. That situation, by any reasonable measure, is a powder keg, and the Cowboys are standing right next to it, holding a lit match, telling everyone around them not to worry. Stay tuned, because this offseason is far from over, and when training camp opens, and the cameras roll, and the questions come flooding back about contracts and behavior and long-term futures, we will all find out very quickly Which version of George Pickens the Dallas Cowboys are getting in 2026?